Star Trek has often had a disappointing history with video games. Unlike the most often compared to Star Wars, Trek has never had a dedicated development studio to churn out interesting games which both capture the feeling of the franchise and expand its lore. A collection of point-and-click adventures, space combat sims, FMV titles, and other outliers with a shockingly wide range of success and failure. While there are some gems here and there, the immense task of attempting to capture the breadth of a franchise like Star Trek in video game form cannot be undersold. But if there was anything which stood a chance of doing it, it was the definitively titled MMORPG Star Trek Online. Going into Star Trek Online, I have to confess my own unfamiliarity with this genre of gaming. Growing up, I was more adept at shooters and open world games, branching out into RPGs with Fallout and Mass Effect. Mass Effect undoubtedly holds the title of my favourite game series ever and is the template for which truly immersive Star Trek RPGs we've been missing for all this time. While an MMO could never capture the sense of immersion and drama a single player RPG could deliver, I was still ready to embrace what Star Trek Online had to offer. The Federation's setup of taking on the persona of a newly graduating Starfleet cadet is a perfect fit for this type of game. The wide array of uniforms, ship types, and specialities, as well as a choice of era, comfortably allows a player to make their experience as personal as possible. It's a cool feeling to be able to tell which show or movie another player character is most fond of purely through visual inspection. I myself took on the persona of a Trill named Alexander Khan dressed in a Star Trek Discovery uniform, just to mess with people's headcanon. After a standard but entertaining first mission, the stage is set to go out and explore the Star Trek universe. The core gameplay of STO is split between ground and space combat, with enough minigames and detours to avoid a constant slog of battle. At least that's the idea. Being an MMO combat is pretty basic, with the strategizing not being in the actual execution but rather in the micromanagement department. Of course, there are optimal places to avoid damage, but essentially the way to power through violent encounters is to mash powers and weapons until you win. Looking on the STO wiki page, it's clear the developers intended some degree of strategy, but they all pretty much go out the window. In space combat, you're meant to whittle down enemy shields with phasers and then blast them with a torpedo strike, while also making sure your facing shields are never taken down and your hull is never exposed. However, because of the slow turn rate of most ships, this tactic doesn't really make much of a difference, as your inputs are too slow to register on screen, making it exceedingly difficult to think several steps ahead. Fiddling with power distribution is also next to useless. The differences in switching between balanced, favouring weapons, speed or shields aren't noticeable in the slightest. Instead, players have to rely on their special abilities to effect any real change within their ship systems while in combat. The task of selecting traits, abilities and equipment in advance is also made into a dry slog, as the sheer number of factors to take into account is frankly overwhelming. Phasers, disruptors, plasma, anti-proton, polaron and tetrion, as well as tricobalt, photon, quantum, multiphasic and transphasic, are all differing weapon types with their own strengths and weaknesses, which will increase or decrease in effectiveness depending on the type of deflector, the type of shields, hull armor, warp core, impulse engines, and or tactical science and engineering consoles. The dull busy work and absurd calculation in trying to create an effective combination of elements to optimize your ship for any given engagement is in desperate need of streamlining. All of this work to optimize your ship is in service of eventual combat, but even that hits another barricade. The Star Trek franchise has dozens of mainstay popular factions and villains to confront the player with, and naturally, just like within the shows and movies, different strategies need to be employed to best defend and attack these enemies. What is effective against the Klingons isn't going to be quite as effective at fighting the Borg. But the lack of streamlining and optimizing ships is severely impacted by some of the worst balancing I have ever witnessed in any video game. Tier 2 enemy ships should not be able to destroy a Tier 5 player ship in a matter of seconds because the Tier 5 player ship doesn't have enough polaron resistance. The lack of information in specifying what type of weapon is strong against which faction means a player has no knowledge of how to effectively optimize their ships against certain enemies without repetitive trial and error or consultation of some online instruction manual. A simple strong against weak against system like those employed in most real-time strategy games would go a long way to saving players an exhaustive amount of time. Because of the non-linear path I ended up taking with later story arcs, I went from going toe-to-toe with Dominion warships and standing my ground, to being wiped out in seconds by VOD war frigates, despite being many levels higher than the minimum required for the Delta Rising missions. To cite another free-to-play example, the third-person action or Warframe balances its enemy types beautifully. Although switching between various elemental-based weapons and ammo upgrades can make you more effective in defeating specific enemy types, basic bullets and blades still allows players to tear through Grenier and Corpus alike. However, while this poor balancing so often hurts the player experience, it can also have a negative effect on the enemies themselves. Playing through the Borg missions, spheres were cutting through my Galaxy class like it was butter, whereas Borg cubes, the supposed big bosses of the game, were wiped out by myself in a few short bursts of torpedoes. What was supposed to be a difficulty curve, ratcheting up the tension of the experience, became a severe difficulty bump, forcing me to grind for a quarter of an hour against mid-level opponents, and then letting me breeze past what was meant to be the big boss. Luckily, the same problems don't plague the ground combat. While once again proper strategy counts for little in favour of vigilant preparedness, the more robust and less complicated optimization system for away teams results in smoother and more enjoyable ground-based encounters. The difficulty curves are largely intact here, and most weapon types are far better balanced, making the times when enemies break their usual type more engaging rather than frustrating. The preservation of the Borg tendency to adapt means the player has to keep changing up their attacks and weapons in order to stay alive, elevating the sense of tension and excitement. The Voth and Iconians bringing big area of effect weapons into play keeps the player moving and avoids complacency. While ground combat is more mechanically solid than space combat, the problems with space-based encounters are remedied somewhat thanks to the game's overall presentation. Star Trek has for the longest time been a low-budget, no-frills production where great writing and creativity compensates for the flimsy sets and unconvincing effects. While in recent years serious money has been dropped in the franchise to give audiences a glossier, more lively experience, the quaint presentation of the previous shows and movies is difficult to fix even with painstaking remastering. That's something Star Trek Online gets right. Not having to worry about the practical side of depicting the Star Trek universe gives Star Trek Online a hell of a lot of freedom. This game looks big. Sure, the interior spaces on ships are a little absurd in their size, but the greater canvas of the game ends up creating some truly stunning visuals for the player. As a longtime Trek fan, it also makes the universe I love so much feel more alive and vibrant than ever before. The psychedelic array of colours and vast environments, populated with countless aliens and other players, is a real treat to behold. However, this is unfortunately hampered by a frankly unacceptable level of bugs and glitches throughout the game. And don't even get me started on the whole lockbox bullshit. The long-standing myth that these kinds of microtransactions are a necessity among games is possibly one of the biggest cons of the industry. The boxes rarely contain anything of worth which can't commonly be acquired by performing regular missions, and the chances of finding a worthwhile starship is the same as a virtual lottery. What makes this worse is the fact that certain ships can only be acquired via lockboxes instead of being available in ship requisitions. This practice of purposefully restricting content in order to goad players into forking over their cash is the exact kind of shitty behaviour people rage at EA for. Once again, I have to bring up Warframe. In fact, I'll just make a video on Warframe in the future. The pedantic task of shuffling the absurd array of in-game currencies is illustrative of the poor interface in general. Simple tasks are made pointlessly difficult by a labyrinthine system of menus, windows, and progress bars. Yes, this can be a very pretty game to look at, but I spend way too much time looking at these windows to appreciate it all that much. But while visuals are routinely blotted out by an overabundance of micromanaging, one element of the game which never suffers is the score. If you're a keen listener to my more recent videos, you'll know how fond I am of this game's music. Composer Kevin Manthei found a sweet spot between the styles of past Trek composers with enough of his own distinct flavours to feel like an expansion of the Star Trek musical universe. The ambient, almost melancholic tracks for travelling evoke the subtle grace of the galaxy map from Mass Effect, while the more chaotic battle cues feel reminiscent of Alexander Courage's work on the original series, and by proxy, Michael Giacchino's work on the Kelvin Timeline films. The main menu track has also been tweaked to audibly resemble Jeff Russo's contributions to Star Trek Discovery, but what brings all these disparate sounds together is a sleek, futuristic, alien science fiction sound, with a Jerry Goldsmith-style combination of synth and traditional orchestra. Altogether, the music for Star Trek Online effortlessly pays homage to what's come before while also evolving the sound into its own unique flavour, something which is also reflected in the game's story. After the initial hype died down from the first tutorial mission, I became a little frustrated with the stories being told in Star Trek Online. While battling with Klingons, Romulans, and Breen and so on had their moments, the story contextualizing all of them was pretty lackluster. Simply one faction is up to no good, engaged in plots to gain power and status. The Klingons are up to no good, stop them. The Romulans are up to no good, stop them too. The Cardassians, and so on and so forth. While the Klingon War arc in particular leads to some cool sequences such as travelling back to the original series era and going toe-to-toe with a doomsday machine, few of the characters or events really satisfy from a dramatic standpoint. There's also little in the way of mission variety. Warp to system, defeat enemy ships, then beam to the surface and defeat enemy ground forces. However, upon completion of these early arcs, things pick up a little with the Borg Invasion. The Borg are probably the best Star Trek villains ever, and they are not put to waste in this story arc. As mentioned earlier, their tendency to adapt to attacks makes ground combat more engaging for the player. The ground-based sequences in general are a highlight as you watch the environment itself succumbing to the invaders. The imposing HR Giger-like cyber tendrils jutting out of the ground is one of the many ways the game capitalizes on a concept that TV shows were unable to depict on such tight budgets. Even the drones distort the humanoid form to its extreme. Their abhuman appearance really gets under your skin in a primal way. The final battle in fluidic space is another way to shake up the usual space-based combat. Overall, it's a terrific Borg adventure, and although the bugs and balancing issues I mentioned earlier ruin the pacing in many ways, ultimately it satisfies. I still don't like the V'ger connection though. New Romulus is also a nicely contained but enjoyable story. Instead of constantly battling Romulans, helping them get their new homeworld up and running really puts you in the shoes of a well-to-do Starfleet officer. In the context of all the past conflicts the Federation and Romulans have had, coming together as allies to help each other is perfect Star Trek-style storytelling. The discovery of an Iconian gateway also kicks off my favourite parts of the Star Trek Online story. The entire Solanae Dyson Sphere arc is one of my favourite things the game has done. Michael Dorn returning to the role of Worf is awesome, and his new fluffy outfit is very nice indeed. Escaping through the gateway into the unknown really feels like going where no one has gone before, as previously, missions were mostly concerned with protecting the Federation we're already familiar with. Further exploration of the Fear brings the players into contact with the aliens from the TNG episode Schisms, which I've always had a fondness for. Once again, the game's advantage in not being constrained by production practicalities means the player can become lost in a nightmare world akin to something out of an H.P. Lovecraft story, of which I also have a fondness for. The Gothic silhouettes of impossibly floating structures suspended in a seemingly infinite eldritch plane is wonderfully spine-chilling. The Solanae Sphere itself is a fantastic expansion to the game universe. It conjures an aesthetic revamp of the game, and the plethora of side quests adjacent to the main story missions means players could spend days upon days in this single area and have entirely satisfying adventures apart from the rest of the galaxy. The Voth are also a welcome return, being one of the few gems amidst the largely generic aliens in Voyager. For one thing, there are actual dinosaurs running around in a Dyson Sphere. Not sure how that works considering what we were told about their evolution though, but if that wasn't cool enough, there are also dinosaur mech suits running around a Dyson Sphere. That's just awesome. Delta Rising is a story arc which I have some mixed feelings about. Having a soft spot for Voyager myself despite its flaws made it a joy to interact with so many returning cast members. I was even glad to see Neelix again. The first mission involving a mind meld with Tuvok was a fantastically bizarre trip of surreal imagery and creative level design. Turning the homely Voyager into a deadly funhouse kept the player excited and weary as to what will be around the next corner. Really great stuff. The surprising reappearance of the Vod War is also welcome. However, I wish 7 of 9 played a bigger role in that story. It was her who reawakened them after all. If she remained as a main supporting player until the story's end, it would have been a fitting character arc. Could Jerry Ryan not have stayed in the booth to record more lines? The Vod War themselves have been updated with some really stunning designs for their ships, weapons and clothing. However, as enemies, I hated them for all the wrong reasons. I hated them because they were absurdly overpowered. Once again, those severe balancing issues come into play here, and a Vod War frigate simply shouldn't be able to annihilate a Sovereign-class cruiser in 2 hits. Sometimes my ship was destroyed before the respawn animation was even finished. You can accuse me of simply being bad at the game if you like, but I should at least be able to play the game before I die, right? The Iconian War was really great. Probably the best story the game has come up with so far. An epic, truly affecting arc with a diverse cast of characters and enjoyable missions from start to finish. The Iconians themselves are amazing in their design, feeling ancient, elegant, terrifying, and genuinely alien. Rather than typical stereotypes which are often used for ancient aliens in sci-fi, the Iconians feel something akin to those described in David Mack's Star Trek work. Simultaneously bizarre and fundamentally different from our own culture, but also emotionally driven and empathetic. Their translucent bodies, mechanized soldiers, and distinct spaceships really evolve what we've come to expect from Star Trek in terms of visuals. The entire arc in general is utterly spectacular with vibrant, deep colors and stunning vistas across numerous alien worlds. Being an MMO, the graphics obviously wouldn't have the fidelity of a AAA single-player RPG, but even within the less advanced and often buggy engine, several shots in the cutscenes and within the gameplay itself could easily make for gorgeous poster art. The construction of the missions in the story also felt fresh. This being a war, there were obviously plenty of space battles, but throwing the Krenim in from the brilliant Voyager episode Year of Hell takes things in an unexpected direction. As a player, we really feel the galaxy is in a desperate fight for survival as we attempt to figure out the winning solution from behind the scenes. Screwing around with timelines for an unexpected battle with cloaked Borg ships was a surprising turn of events which completely caught me off guard. But the crowning achievement in the arc is the final mission, Midnight. At first we get some epic spectacle with a battle to save Earth, but once we step through the time portal, exploring what Iconian society used to be puts the emotionality and themes of the story at the forefront. The incredible shining cityscapes of the ancient world and graceful appearance of the populace really highlights the tragic nature of the Iconians as antagonists. This really felt like a series finale to the Star Trek show we've been playing from the beginning. Even the gameplay problems which negatively impacted other arcs don't rear their heads as much here. The Iconian ships really should be this powerful. You don't build a bunch of Dyson spheres without also building some pants-shittingly tough dreadnoughts. The characters are also well written, well acted, and well used within the plotting. Other times, after getting over the fanboy excitement of seeing an old character returning, I can honestly take them or leave them, usually skipping a lot of their technical jargon-laced dialogue. But here, Tom Paris and his merry band are instantly likeable. The moment Krenim researcher Noya's wife, Claudia, was erased from existence was genuinely quite shocking, but it's the Romulan thread which really brings the climax together. The tragic backstory of the Iconians is mirrored in all kinds of clever ways. The Iconians have a prime directive, just like the Federation, and the cause for the Iconian civilization's destruction once again conjures up numerous avenues for debate around that policy. The Romulans lost their homeworld and have been struggling for the entire game as to what path to take next. Rebuild a militant empire, or evolve into a peaceful republic. It's the same choice the Iconians had to make, and the rest of the galaxy has suffered the consequences. Sela, who up until this point has been a scenery-chewing cartoon villain, is reworked into a nuanced frenemy, and it's honestly the best material the character has ever been given, within the TV show as well. My only gripe with the climax is the potential for Taket to return as a future villain. Like, come on guys, we just had the biggest, most impressive story you could tell with the Iconians. I don't need a disappointing follow-up where Taket returns. You can't really get much bigger than the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance. But in general, the Iconian War is quite brilliant and is the most amount of enjoyment I've had with the game so far. 8 out of 10 would boldly go again. Timey-wimey missions with Daniels was also cool. I'm a big fan of Enterprise Seasons 3 and 4, and expanding on the strengths of those years, coupled with shoutouts to other Trek time travelers, and those two story arcs are an enjoyable romp. New Frontiers was a nice delve into a lesser-known side of the Star Trek universe, and it's always awesome to see LaForge. Rather than repeated combat, there was a nice balance of action and exploration in these missions. Kumarke was a likeable ally, and the Zenkathi have a really awesome design. While New Frontiers feels like guest starring on a LaForge spin-off show, Victory is Life feels like joining in on Deep Space Nine Season 8, and because Deep Space Nine happens to be my favourite Trek show, I really liked this one. Seeing the iconic station rendered in painstaking detail was a delight, and featuring a mission in which a player must spacewalk around the exterior was a stroke of genius. The large-scale space combat missions also brought that epic quality which DS9 had. The plethora of returning cast members made this fanboy very happy indeed. While I was disappointed in the Herc being generic insect aliens, the larger conflicts surrounding this new era for the Dominion took the much-loved characters to interesting new places. Sure, Sure, the annoying bugs still pulled me out of cutscenes, but when it was working smoothly, this campaign was truly affecting for a DS9 fan. Also, Jeffrey Combs is still awesome, he should be in Star Trek Discovery too. Age of Discovery was short, sharp and to the point, but a good time. Really, its purpose was to show off new stuff to tie in with the new TV show, which I suppose is fine, and I'd be willing to bet there's more to come in the future. As it stands, it's a standard Klingons are up to no good plot line, generated to show off some cool visuals and designs from the Star Trek Discovery TV show. And just as gorgeous as it looks on the TV screen, the production design elements from Discovery look gorgeous in the video game form. I know that show is divisive for some people, but I think we can all come together to appreciate some cool new ships, uniforms and gear. Fast paced and fun with some cool set pieces and character interactions, but this is more of a cool side quest than a proper story arc. Overall, Star Trek Online has really come into its own as a platform for great Star Trek stories. My only main criticism for the writing in general is too much reliance on old material. At times these stories felt more like playing Star Trek trivia online. While the ways in which the writers bring back and combine older elements from the franchise can be surprising, it's ultimately a bit shallow and can do a disservice to the depth of the universe. Who were those aliens from Schisms? Well, they were working for the Iconians. Who were the Herc? Well, they were controlled by the Changelings. And then of course there was the whole V'ger Borg thing. The Iconians in Star Trek Online felt like their own distinctive faction, giving the game its own identity within the franchise. Although they were mentioned before, their appearance, lore and stories felt fresh. But if the twist for every story is just going to be, and it's this thing from that episode, then it's a massive waste of potential. I'd challenge the lead writers of Star Trek Online to create some strange new life and strange new worlds of their own. If the writing team went more in this direction, it would prevent the universe from feeling small, and also wouldn't make the storytelling as dense to possible newcomers. Sure, my eyebrows were raised when I saw the Klingons wielding a doomsday machine, but there's a strength in making Star Trek accessible to outsiders. For now, even if the stories in the game do rely too heavily on placating fanboyism, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't invested in a lot of it. It's been really cool to rub shoulders with some of my favourite Star Trek characters, and some great villains are always worth bringing back for more adventures. It's clear there are a lot of Trekkies on Cryptic's team, but there's plenty more out there for players to explore. Do not get me wrong, I really want to enjoy Star Trek Online. And I have done. The majority of the time I cruise around in my ship, wrapping myself up in the universe I love, but time and time again my enjoyment comes crashing to a halt thanks to a crippling bug, overly complicated interface and poor design. Does Star Trek Online suck? Kinda. I know there's a passionate fanbase out there who may feel angry to hear that, but I have to be honest and I have to ask myself the question, if this wasn't a Star Trek game, would I still be playing it? Probably not. But like many, I really want a truly great Star Trek game. But considering how active the player base and development team seem to be, there are absolutely ways to make Star Trek Online into the definitive Star Trek video game experience. Streamline the interface, fix the bugs and balancing, and deliver some more great stories. Then, a truly awesome Star Trek game will exist. If Star Trek has taught me anything as a franchise, it's to remain optimistic about the future, and I remain so about this game. Thank you so much for watching. This turned out to be a bit of a juggernaut of a video to make. I originally planned it months ago, but it turned out I had a lot more to say than I thought I did. I know there were lots of criticisms, but I tried to make it as constructive as possible. If you love the game, in no way am I trying to tell you you're wrong. If you enjoy my videos, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay up to date on all my new uploads. Over on my Patreon, you can see videos up to a week early for only $5 a month, but really any support is appreciated. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank my patrons Chris Lord, Millie Coleman, Snejana Markova, L. Carton, T. Stoney, Andy Luke, James and Larry Bennett. If you have any thoughts on Star Trek Online yourself, comment below and let me know. Until next time guys, have a good one, and as always, live long and prosper.